Poverty is not just the absence of money, but the absence of opportunity. And the United States is a country where you have both freedom and abundant opportunities. And moving to the United States has given me both. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. I came from a close-knit family. I was the third of four children. And the best thing that my parents gave me was the gift of education. Even though I came from a poor family, they gave me education with the instruction that this is the tool that will help me to dig my way out of poverty and ignorance. But what my parents did was that they instilled in us the value of faith, hard work, and not giving up. They made us realize that if you put in the work, you will definitely get the reward. I came without a dime in my pocket. All I had was big dreams, determination to succeed, and the resilience. I got my first job at the age of 14. My job was on a construction site. My duties were to move concrete on a large pan from one end of the construction site to another one. I worked on that day from around 6 in the morning to about 7 at night. At the end of the day, the employer refused to pay me. And the reason was because she did not authorize the foreman to hire me. So I worked from sunup to sundown and didn't get paid. That tore up my spirit. And from that moment on, I decided that I was going to become a lawyer. And I was going to use every ounce of strength within me to fight against injustice, regardless of how powerful the opponent is. I am a man that worked my way up from nothing. I know what it means to feel like you're being unfairly treated, and I'm the person that can stand up to opponents regardless of how big or how powerful they are. Welcome to this episode of Legal Angle with Emmanuel Olawale. My guest today is State Rep Dontavius Jarells. He has stormed the State House like a hurricane, making waves and improving lives. Welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here, Emmanuel. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for coming. Can you, I don't want to assume that everyone watching the show know who you are. Can you tell us who Dontavius is?
Oh man, how long we got? Dontavius Jarells, born in Cleveland, Ohio, in the Huff side of Cleveland, and growing up, I learned very quickly that the world around me was not based upon an individual sum of individual choices, but really a system, and a system that unfortunately could lead to poverty, helplessness, addiction, hopelessness. And so I really started my journey understanding policy as a space to create solutions and find um, opportunities to use my voice for those who may not have the means to, you know, speak for themselves. Went to East Tech, did really well, did robotics, learned to really analyze a number of just different the world around me, right, with the team. Then after graduation, went to Hiram College where I majored in political science economics. And then I had a great opportunity after graduation to come down to Columbus and work in the State House as a Legislative Service Commission fellow. That changed my life because I learned very quickly that I knew nothing about state government, but yet state government has a hand in every part of our individual experience and collective experience in this beautiful Ohio. From Medicaid to SNAP benefits to how fast you can drive down the roads, particularly on an interstate, to lead prevention and mitigation, to just addressing poverty as a system. Everything you can think of was talked about, debated. Laws were passed in the state house, and I saw it in real time as a 22-year-old. Loved it. said at some point in my life I would love to be a state representative. I did not know then that 10 years later I'll be elected in that role representing Ohio House District 25. And we were off to the races working on behalf of people. The work of the state house is for me is literal. The issues that we pass, it can be the difference between life and death for people. And so I take it seriously every single day to stand up for my constituents, to use their voice and bring their voices with me to the state house and really fight to build a better Ohio for all of us. And so that's a little bit about me. Just I'm here to do a job to make people's lives better. And those individuals just so happen to look like my mama, my grandmother, my cousin, my uncle. And so I love what I do because I know the people I represent, they look like me and they come from where I come from.
Thank you. And how did you land that opportunity to come to the State House as an intern? Tell us about that
Yeah,
journey.
so the Legislative Service Commission Fellowship is pretty unique. It's a 13-month fellowship that allows a student to come who's graduating to come to the state house and work for a myriad of different legislators or one legislator, depending upon when you come in. And so I just so happened when I came in 2010 into for the 2011 term, which was the 131st General Assembly. Um, I happened to work for four different legislators. Representative Matt Salassi, who served as the pro temp at the time when the Democrats were in the majority, and then became the assistant minority leader when the Dems moved to the minority, which basically means we have whether you have the majority of the votes or a minority of the votes in the GA. For those watching, and then I moved to work for Leader Budish out of Cleveland, and then moved to work with Connie Pillage out of Cincinnati, Representative John Barnes out of Cleveland, and then last but certainly not least, Representative Dale Mallory out of Cincinnati. And so those individuals really shared with me how they navigated their constituents, how they showed up for their people, and I took from each and every one of them something different away that I now incorporate in my day-to-day experience as a legislator serving 100,000 plus people. And so the fellowship, anyone can apply to it as long as you're a graduate. And I always, I rep it hard because it certainly has changed my life, but I can tell you that it's changed so many other people's lives. Lobbyists are now we're fellows, and executive directors are fellows. I mean, it made a difference. And so I would urge anyone who's interested in policy to look up the Ohio Legislative Service Commission Fellowship and see if you're interested.
Thank you. And what was it like growing up in Cleveland?
Well, man, listen, that's an interesting question. I mean, life was good, relatively. It's just that the environment was low resourced. When I took three buses to get to school. Saw my parent have to work multiple jobs and have to navigate things. I mean, there were good times and there were bad times. And I think about, I and what my siblings and I went through, and, we were, you know, I was fortunate, but I also realized, and I had friends who weren't so fortunate, who, took extra donuts and put them in their book bag. I didn't know at the time that they were probably going home hungry, but that was a reality for so many of my friends, right? And so I learned not just through my own experience, but the experiences of the folks around me, to really understand like what's going on, like what's happening in our communities that's leading people to despair. And I learned that early in my life, which is interesting. I wanted to be Oprah, interestingly enough. Growing up, I always thought I was a lead poison survivor, then went and had speech pathology classes and learned how to speak. And so folks are oftentimes complimenting me on how I spoke. And I was like, man, I need to do something with my voice one day. And I always thought that I would love to ask hard questions to, open up the world to what's possible. And I kind of do that now in my role as a state rep. But I take with me those experiences growing up in Cleveland, but also my friends and my family's experiences, and I use that as guides, if you will, to look at the system and ask myself, what can we do differently?
Hmm. So you were growing up in an environment that wasn't conducive, at least with what you were noticing back then. But then you had this vision of another place, of a better place. How were
Yeah.
you able to visualize that as a kid, even though you haven't had that experience of that other side?
That's a good question. So I was very fortunate when I was in high school. I actually started like eighth grade going into ninth. I was introduced to robotics, and I could say robotics saved my life because it provided me with a number of things. One, a kind of a wider access or lens of access in terms of what's possible. You know, Dean Kingman created this program called FIRST, which stands for recognition, inspiration, and recognition in science and technology. And when I was in high school, I remember building 120-pound robots, programming them to shoot baskets, to throw frisbees, to push, almost like sumo wrestling for robots. I mean, we did a lot, but beyond that, we also did community projects. We put together baskets for our students in the school for Thanksgiving and Christmas. We gave away clothes. We did clothing drives. We raised money for different service projects around our community. And so I learned, through robotics, what was possible for me to use my voice. I became captain of the team, and it just was a beautiful opportunity for me to see what I can be inspired to be and have individuals pour into me and say to me, hey, you can do it. You are enough. Right. And so I took that kind of energy and I went to college with it. And I did that. Right. I kind of, really jumped into the water and just start swimming and said, listen, I want to do something. I want to build something. I want to be something related to policy because I experienced what it was like to change people's lives while I was in high school. A simple act of putting together a basket of food for a family who's going hungry, you know, it- while some people may say, oh, that's small, that wasn't small for that family. And I take those same incremental steps in my policy work in the legislature. We can't always do sweeping progressive changes because of the where we are in the legislature as in the minority, but the incremental steps that we're able to take, it matters because those families are impacted for the better, right? And I can have many examples. I could talk to you about that. um, and I learned how to navigate in high school through robotics, and I still use those same skills today. And so robotics saved my life. And that's, to answer your question, that's how I learned that there was a much greater path for me that I could take.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you were captain of that team.
Oh yeah, I
So
was.
so invariably you had that leadership quality since you were a kid.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I was told to step up and step in. And and I always kind of, when I see something that doesn't look right or doesn't look good, I want to get my hands dirty too, right? And that's okay, right? That's what leaders are supposed to do. And so I take that same approach to my work in the legislature, just showing up for people and really having an open door policy for folks to feel heard, seen, validated in their experience. And that is, I think that's what, I don't call myself a politician because while I'm good at politics, I'm better at public service because I try to emulate what I would hope someone would do for me if I had elected them, right? And so that's kind of how that's my ethos, right? As a legislator, but also as a leader.
Make people feel heard, seen, and validated.
Come
Wow,
on.
that's profound. Yeah. What was your home life like growing up in
Well,
Cleveland?
it was interesting. I had a great mom, had a great, amazing grandmother. Rest in peace. She cooked for. She had her own. Well, she cleaned homes of families during the Depression, and then then started cooking and started to cater, and then start catering for the Browns and did all types of stuff. But she was sick, at times, and so I remember my grandmother watching me, and my mom having to go to work, and then I didn't know my father growing up, and and my mom married, and life was okay. It's I will tell you, it was um the environment was not the best, but you get used to it when you grow up in a space like that, right? Like when all around you, when your friends go through it, you go through it, everybody's going through stuff, right? You learn how to um, compartmentalize, and but I never let it go away from my mind. I always question why. Why is our communities like this? Why is our community so low resourced? My father, stepfather at the time, he would um, we built a pond in our house, in front of our house, and the kids would come around the community and like throw rocks in, throw pennies in, and I asked my stepfather, like, why did we do that, right? Why do we have to dig and put the liner in? He's like, because we want to make our communities beautiful. And so I learned from my father, my mom, and so many others, like, what's the what is service? What does it mean? And sometimes service doesn't have to be something grandiose. It could be literally something that you do in your front yard to inspire others to do something too. And so, while the community around me was low resourced, I think what my family tried to instill in me was love and appreciation for that community, and to be better than the environment in which we were in. And so, um, again, I take that with me to the State House to try to serve people in a way that inspires them to serve others as well.
Thank you. When did you realize that social justice is the tool that could help you to help the community?
Yeah, so for me, um, I take my job, again, as I said earlier, literal, like life and death. And policy is the gateway to justice. There's a number of things that is necessary, right? Activism, uh, systemic change through policy, investment through our dollar, right? What we invest in, all of those pieces matter. And my lane, if you will, because I think we all have different lanes. My lane is really looking at policy as a tool towards social justice. Case in point, as I said earlier, I was I had lead poisoning growing up, and it almost killed me. And I remember my mom taking me to the hospital, doctors testing me, and and really just seeing in real time, you know, the danger that I was in as a child, and then also seeing the residual effect of lead poisoning on my life, right? Continuously. Fast forward, now I'm in the State House. I am leveraging my voice and my story to say that we need to do something different. And I'm proud to say that because of my work, but also the bill I introduced with Representative Tom Patton, who's a Republican, and also the partners, the amazing partners from in Cleveland and Columbus and everywhere in between. We were able to secure 150 million to the Department of Development in the last GA to work on lead prevention and mitigation, particularly for families all across the state. I can tell you that had it not been for my voice and the voice of so many others, there would be kids in Cleveland and other places across the state who would have had continued to have damaging impact and damaging effects of lead in their system. And they would have showed up in our criminal justice system. They would have showed up in in our education system by not having the tools they need to succeed, and ultimately not have everything given to them that I had to be successful. And so justice is about making sure our system does right by those children, right? Making sure that we have the investment to remove the lead out of our communities so no child has to be the canary in the coal mine to say when there's lead present, particularly in Black communities. And so that's one example of a number of things that I can say about how do we use policy to address the system and create justice for communities that in some cases may have been historically left behind. Um, so that's what I'll say.
Policy is the gateway for justice. Uh, Tell us about the lack of affordable housing that you noticed as a kid and
Mm,
that propels you even today as
yeah,
a state rep.
yeah. So affordable housing is probably one of the biggest issues facing us as a city, as a county, as a state. I mean, even the governor has talked about affordable housing and figuring out ways to address this issue. I'm proud to say and happy to work alongside my colleagues all across our political spectrum. So, from city council to county commissioners, to really look at this issue in a holistic way. On a city level, we know that our city, Columbus, is growing exponentially. There are more people coming to this city than we are building homes for. And so that is hurting particularly our seniors. It's hurting our individuals who are just entering the job environment. So particularly our college students. And it's also hitting individuals who come from low resource communities and simply just want a safe place to live. And so this issue is going to be, it's going to take all of us, literally, from us looking at zoning laws, from us looking at ways to innovatively create housing. So redevelopment, which is I've been a proponent of some of our uh, um, buildings that were used to be office spaces, but because of COVID and transitions to more of the virtual environment, how do we reuse and repurpose those spaces to commercial spaces to be residential and make it affordable? I'm a big proponent of mixed use. I live in a mixed use community, and making sure that there are folks from all walks of life connecting with each other. And so the policies that we're enacting in the state, some of them are targeted to individuals or first-time home buyers. But I can tell you that our caucus is looking heavily at our budget currently and asking what else can we do to make sure that those who are living in apartments have access to affordable rent. And so there's a number of things happening, but I think it's going to take a holistic approach to addressing this. Cleveland's in a different position, right? They're growing, but not as fast, right? And so, for me growing up, I saw people get evicted. I saw people not have enough to maintain their housing. And so it was a different situation. And when I came down to Columbus and now as a representative, um, you know, my old district, House District 25, 1 in 7 individuals had an eviction on a record, which is one of the reasons why we are looking at legislation to address evictions and working with my colleagues to, look at how do we make sure that no family, when they have an eviction on their record, that's a scarlet letter that precludes them from getting affordable housing. Because right now, unfortunately, you can't remove an eviction off your record. And so, that's how we talk about justice, right? How do we make sure that individuals have all the opportunities at their fingertips to live the best life possible? And so, whether it is working on building affordable housing or making sure people have access to affordable housing, holistically, I want to work across all the political spectrum to ensure our families get what they need.
Thank you. And you mentioned that people did not have access to education.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So I think there's a number of ways we can talk about this. When I was growing up, there were individuals who were in the educational space, but wasn't in a space and a frame of mind to actually learn. So if you're going to school hungry, if you're going to school with dirty clothes, if you're going to school and You couldn't sleep at night because your parents were fighting. There was domestic violence in the home or substance use in the homes. Um, you know, it's more than just a building. It's what we bring in the building with us. And so much of my work when I look at education policy is holistically. How do we make sure that we are ensuring student wellness across the board, right? How are we identifying students who are having trouble, um, and really putting a, the number of supports, but all the supports possible to help that child thrive. Um, I just toured a school not too long ago and was asking these questions about, do you have a wash machine in your school building? Luckily, they said yes, right? Because they know their children come to school with dirty clothes. Um, they give away food in the pantry in their school because they recognize that there's some students who come in hungry and will leave hungry if they don't get something from the pantry that day. And so access to education is not simply the access to enter the door, but it's what the student enters with and how do we support them again to be their best self. That also, you know, um, as you move through the spectrum and they go into a collegiate environment, what are we doing to support them? Mental health and addiction is real. We are seeing more and more um, uh, Black boys and girls die by suicide. And part of that is because we have to have honest conversations about mental health. It's one of the reasons why I went into mental health, to be quite frank with you, after I did my stint in the State House as a fellow, because I know someone who experienced, severe and persistent mental illness. I know what it was like to see a loved one who was addicted and to see their life, the choices that they make, you know, to maintain their high, right? And I said to myself, I wanted to be a part of the solutions. And so much like education, right? How do we ensure that we're addressing the full person and their humanity and providing everything possible to them so that they can again be their best self? And so, so education for me is about not just ensuring student wellness, but also building the pipelines for them to be successful. So as we get into college, what are we doing to make sure college is affordable? I sit on as a ranking member of higher ed. I work every single day to think about, ways in which we can lower the cost of tuition, increase OCOG, which is our college opportunity grant and the Pell Grant, and all the other things that will make the collegiate environment affordable, but also what else can we do? Career technical schools, right? Trades. How do we make sure that a student has access to anything and everything they want to experience so that they can make the best decision for their life, right? And so education it's the student wellness, mental health, and addiction, and ensuring the student gets everything they need to thrive, and then also providing that level of access to them so that they can make the best decision for for their life and their family.
Thank you. So it's not just about having access to the building, it's about everything else that goes with it. Because an
Mhm.
hungry child who's not going to be willing to learn, a
Right.
child that comes from a home that is very unstable will not be able to learn.
Right.
Hmm. So, what was college like for you?
Oh man. So I went to Hiram, and it was I, I would say it was a culture shock. I grew up in a predominantly Black environment, and to go to a school that was a predominantly white institution, I learned to square dance during student orientation. So, so that was just to kind of give a reference point of what I was going into. But I'll tell you, Hiram was good to me. I had the opportunity to chair our African American, or be the vice president of our African American Students Union. I was a chair of our Martin Luther King um, a memorial event. I was the first Black male to be a Garfield Scholar, because our school is our claim to fame. And so we had James A. Garfield. as as our president of the college before becoming president of the United States. I did a lot on campus just as a student leader, and it developed me to think critically about policy. As a political science economics major, and so my collegiate experience was transformative because I learned who I was as a student. Some of the most pivotal moments of my life happened during college, and I still use many of those same skill sets today in the work that I do serving people. And so my college environment was great.
Yeah, thank you. And what actually inspired you to become politically active?
Mm. Um, my grandmother told me, where you come from does not determine where you go. And she would always say that to me when I was having a very hard day, um, and just having a moment. And I use that as a reference point because I kind of think about my journey from that lens, that I came from an environment that was low resource, that I saw hopelessness, and now I exist in a world filled with possibility. And now my job is to ensure and multiply that possibility for other people. And so I got involved politically because I learned very early in my life that if you want to change things, it's not just at the ballot boxes, with your own body, your own feet, your own voice, right? And to stand up for people who don't have the means to stand up for themselves. Um, and I also recognize too that, you know, the people that I'm fighting for, they look like me. And what better legacy to leave um, than to know that you did all you could to help somebody else. And so being political for me is an act of love. It's a form of expression. It's a opportunity for me to um, give back in the way that so many others have given to me, and it just so happened that might be a little good at it, and I try my best to use my gift to help other people. And so being political was as a as an act of evolution, because I wanted to see something different.
Thank you. Here was this young man who grew up in an economically deprived environment,
Hmm.
and an environment that you could say that doesn't have a lot of political power. And then you decide to major in political science and economics.
Hmm.
What led to those choices?
To my major, yeah, that's a good question. You know, I knew that I didn't want to be an engineer after my time on doing robotics. And at first, I was going to be an engineer, and then math just wasn't cutting it for me. I actually took a calculus class, and I was like, this not it for me. I love what I do in robotics, but I'm really good at speaking. I'm really good at representing, right? And I think that was kind of the seed that was planted. And I also did broadcasting in high school as well. And so when I went to college, I took a number of courses in, politics 101 and economics 101. And I just fell in love with, really looking at microeconomics, looking at how things are bought and sold, and prices, demand, slope curve. I mean, all those things. But also how they inform decisions. Like when you don't have enough of something, what does that lead to in terms of behavior? And I just felt like, man, this is something that you can use. This is tangible. I can see this. Like, I almost felt like, have you ever seen the Matrix? Neo saw all the symbols around him. I was like, I was seeing symbols and signs like, oh, this is why my community looks the way it does. It's not because of, Johnny, got caught with a gun. it's it's a system that influences behavior. And I was like inspired. I was like, oh, I can do something with this. And so um, I think that's why I chose it. It really was to learn and get a deeper understanding of politics and economics. I felt like I knew my community better and I knew what happened, right? And the choices that political leaders made that led to what I saw growing up. And I said, okay, if I understand the choices that were made then that led to this, then maybe the choices we make here can lead to a better situation. And that's what kind of led me down this path of just really thinking through how I can show up as my best self to serve people.
It was like you're being led by this invincible compass. Like some of the choices you made, even though you didn't realize where it would lead you, but
Oh
they were
no.
like the right choices. Because the choices you made, even as to what you decided to study, was something that was going to bring relief to where you came from.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know it then. As I got deeper into the space, into my curriculum, I was like, oh man, like even political philosophy was just inspiring to me to understand like how people think and how people leverage politics as a form of expression to move things. And it's fascinating. It was fascinating for me, and I really just fell in love with my institution because of the quality of classes that I had. And then I went to South Africa and experienced, you know, to see a country that is, with so much history go through apartheid and it just all the things that they had to endure, and to see political leaders resist and fight, and to see the changes that that country has had because of that resistance, right? And so I took that home. So all those little seeds that were planted along the way in my collegiate experience kind of, forms me today, right? Where I use those experiences as a way and as a tool to inspire others.
Thank you. And when you came to Columbus for, to the State House for the fellowship, you decided not to go back to Cleveland. Why?
Mm. I fell in love with the city. The city gave so much to me. Um, I also, found a tribe here, and a village here, people who we were all kind of came from the same place. There's a lot of transient folks that from all walks of life come into Columbus. And it was at the time, a melting pot of different cultures and experiences. And I just loved that. I loved the environment. At the time, I was a member of the Ohio Young Black Democrats, became president of the Ohio Young Black Democrats, um, began to really, I traveled the state and built chapters of the organization. And but Columbus was always a place that I went back to refuel and replenish and re-energize. And I just said to myself one day, I didn't want to leave. I thought that the work that I do here, um, it could ripple into all the other corners of the state, and 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 I knew I wanted to be in the state house one day. Um, did I know then that I was you know going to be there 10 years later? No, right? But I did envision a world where I would not be too far from the state house. And so and that was when I was 22, 23 years old. And so you know um, God is good all the time. And I'm very much thankful that this city um, has given me so much, and now has given me the position to lead. So
I think the foresight you had as a child remained with you even at that time. Can you tell us what it was like to be the president of the Young Democrats in Columbus?
yeah, I mean, it was inspirational. I mean, to see young black leaders um, come together And shout out to Jade and Crystal Davis and Antoinette Wilson, Gabrielle and Simone Craw. I mean, there's so many people who I worked with to build Ohio Young Black Democrats to be what it was and what it is. Shout out to Jordan Hawkins, who's now current president of the organization. And I would say that it was an active revolution in a way, because we existed as a space to inspire young people to come together collectively and use their voices collectively for their neighborhoods and but for the broader political system. And so many of my colleagues who were members are elected themselves. Judge Carla Baldwin and I mean, like, there's so many people. I mean, Councilwoman Stephanie House, she was then state representative. You have Commissioner Erica Crawley. I mean, there's so many people. Shannon Hardin, our Columbus City Council president, and all of us were young back. We're still young, kind of, because we're still eligible, but we were younger back in the day, thinking about what the future would look like with us in leadership, and looking at the problems that we were seeing in our communities and saying, what can we do to make a difference? And how do we support and lift each other as we climb, right? OIBD was a space really to develop us into the leaders that we are today. And to know that you are not walking that journey alone, that you have other people who have similar goals and aims to make their communities better. And so being president of Ohio Young Black Dems was transformative for me, because I got in return a village of leaders who also saw what I saw in terms of what's possible in our communities.
So when did you realize it was the right time to run for the state rep?
It's a good question. So I'll tell you, God is good. So I ran in 2016 when I was at the time 28 years old, and I lost by 1,500 votes in the primary. I was out there, right, engaging my community. And what led me to that moment, I was actually teaching robotics at the time. I was at a robotics tournament with my little ones, and this was at the time when Commissioner Boyce was then Representative Boyce, and he decided to run to be the first African American to be elected to county commissioner. And I just said, it's time. I think I've navigated these policy spaces. I've worked to elect other leaders. I served in various capacities, and because I worked in the state house before, I thought I had opportunity to really leverage that to know how to navigate the environment when I first walked in. And so I ran, but I didn't win. But I'll tell you, I did win in a way, because at the time I was distraught because I lost. But when I look back at that moment as a 28-year-old, I'm thankful, because I learned a lot about my style of service and what people really wanted to see. I thought that people wanted to see someone who's going to, share with them the answer and fight for them and be, almost like brass knuckle fighting in terms of the issues and how I show up. What I would tell you now as a leader, as assistant minority leader, right, one of the youngest in the country, most of the work that I do is about sharing my experience, my story, being vulnerable in the moment with people, and how that influences my level of service to them. So I talk about my lead poisoning. I talk about what I experienced growing up in Cleveland. I talk about, the experiences that I had navigating an environment that did not want me at times, and how I use that as a motivation to show up differently for my community, And that what did not happen when I was 28 years old running for the very first time. And it made a difference, right? Not just in my life, but to the in terms of how I serve. And um, so my inspiration was really, showing up and standing up for people at 16. I mean, in 2016 when I ran the first time, my inspiration for running in 20 was, you know, leveraging my experience and experience of others to be the best representative that I can be, to transform people's lives that look like me, right? And even just the mental perspective of how I navigated that moment, 16 versus 20, it's completely different. And so probably a lot. I've never really broke that down before, but it was I think I'm thankful that I lost because I think it made me a better legislator, and it definitely made me a better leader.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand what it means to lose an election, even though you were so distraught at that time. But then
Yeah.
you get to realize that even though you lost the election, you actually won some other things.
Okay,
And
100%.
that experience will reshape you, make you better.
Facts.
So, what was it like for you the night you realized that you finally won
Mm.
4 years later?
So interestingly enough, I won in COVID. So it, when I ran 20, technically it was 2019, and as moved into 2020, the shutdown happened, and we were in the pandemic. And the night of the primary, our primary was supposed to be in March, and the day of, I remember I was standing out there, shaking hands, hugging people, giving out my lit, engaging my community in terms of why I would have loved and been honored to have their vote. You know, Congresswoman Joyce Beatty was out there. We were checking our phones because we heard that there is a likelihood that the primary was going to stop. And it was the day before, it was that Monday before the election, actually. So we heard through the channels that Governor DeWine was going to cease the election from happening because the pandemic was surging, and that's what happened. And so we ended up canceling that primary and then moving it basically 2 months into May. And so imagine, going, hugging, giving out pamphlets, knocking on doors, being, just showing up for my community during this primary, and then nothing, having to do everything virtual. So we had to, we did podcasts, we did, Clubhouse was really popular back then. We did everything we could to like engage while we were in the home, right? As I was, we wrote letters to constituents asking them to continue to mail in their ballots, and we did everything we could to just continue the motivation that we were having in the election. And then May came. I think it was May 12th, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong on that, but uh, um, or May 6th. It was one of those 2 days. Um, the uh, the election was happening, and the difference between what happened in 20 and what normally happens is they dumped it all the votes were dumped at the same time. And so, they were, the polls finally closed. And then I was talking to my team, like, oh, when are we going to get our first batch of votes? They were like, well, you're not going to get any batches of votes because they're all going to dump. And so we waited and waited and waited and waited. And then about like 2:30 in the morning the next day, so I was asleep. I woke up at like 4 o'clock. I was like, oh man, I check my phone, and I had like 50 texts from people congratulating me. And I was like, wait, did I win? And I didn't know at the time. And so I went to the Board of Elections, looked up my phone, and I won. I was like, oh my gosh. Now, mind you, I'm like half asleep, trying to figure this out, fumbling with my phone. I'm texting my team at 4 a.m. in the morning, like, oh, we won. Like, yeah, we've been trying to call you. Yes, we knew. So, So my first story of my election win was very interesting because we were navigating COVID, and but I would never forget that moment, right? Because in spite of the pandemic, we had amazing turnout from people using their voice, and for them to have voted me in as their representative, I would never forget that day.
Wow. What was your first day like as a state representative?
Yeah, so the first day, so there are a couple of things that happen before you get into the legislature. So you go through an orientation, and so because we were still in the pandemic, my orientation was all virtual, and um, so it was very much different than normal. And because normally you go, you meet your colleagues you're walking in with, you would have ethics training and all those things in person, and none of that was in person. It was all virtual. And so when I walked into the state house, I walked into the state house with a mask on. Like my first, holding my hand on the Bible with my significant other, I had a mask on, and all my friends and family had masks on, and so it was different than what normally happens, right? We were distanced, right? I mean, when had our first session, there were folks sitting in the back of the chamber, there were folks sitting in the rows, and we had like a person, a seat in between us. COVID changed everything, and but I'll tell you, I'll never forget that day because it was just it was just fascinating to be in the chamber that I was a fellow in, and you can't walk on to the floor unless you're an elected or previous elected. And so I never walked on the floor of the House when I was a fellow. And so to imagine me walking up those steps for the first time, walking down that carpet, right right near the speaker's dais, and to see it in like full view, right? That was surreal for me. And as a black kid, right, who didn't know what the state house was until he worked there, at 22, and then now to be, on the floor voting for leadership at 10 years later, man, it was a historical moment for me, and I loved every minute.
Was your mom there?
No, interestingly enough, I had a lot of family there though, and my mom was there in spirit.
Oh, wow. God bless us all. Wow. Okay. How has your experience, growing up, all these upheavals you've gone through, how has it informed the way you fight for social justice in the House?
Yeah, so I use my voice a lot, and I ask a lot of good questions on the floor and the committee. I serve on the following committees: Finance Committee. I'm the ranking member for Finance for the Higher Ed Subcommittee, where we address all things higher ed. I sit on Insurance, which I served on in the previous GA, Commerce and Labor, and Constitutional Resolutions. And so for me, a lot of the bills that I introduce are related to dignity. So my first bill was the bill to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. My second bill is a bill that ensures that every individual receives their pay stub, because we want to crack down on wage theft, because we know that this is real, especially when we have families working 2-3 jobs, or individuals working 2-3 jobs just to make ends meet. We're having conversations around addressing sub-minimum wage. And so, dignity in work, dignity in expression, dignity in how our communities and our systems should show up for people has been something that, not just has been a lived experience of mine, but it's also an experience that I try to create through my legislation. And so I'm really big on using my personal story as a space and a gateway to advance policy. I think that's kind of the the best way. Tell your story, right? So I use lead poisoning as an example. I told my story about lead poisoning, and we were able to get 150 million, right? I tell my story about navigating poverty and seeing families struggle. That's why I'm pushing for a $15 minimum wage, and working on the pay stub bill. I've seen what it was like to be called names, and to live in a world where you're not respected because you look different, or you are different, or you're differently abled, or you have developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities. And so I push for a law now that remove derogatory language out of our Ohio Revised Code, right? So my experiences has impacted the types of bills that I create and I push, because I know that those bills would make a difference when they passed. And so dignity has been kind of the foundation of, in terms of how I serve and how I represent, for my community.
And why is dignity so important to you? Why is it the fulcrum of your fight?
Yeah, that's a good question. So dignity is everything, I feel. I mean, if you don't have dignity, what do you have? Um, I think that so much of changing communities is about giving people the opportunity to be their best self. And if you're working 2, 3 jobs to make ends meet, how can you show up for your sons or your daughter? If you have families who are struggling to pay their bills, or struggling to keep their house over their head, roof over their head, that in turn has a ripple impact to every other facet of their life and their existence. And so to build dignity in, how we provide support and how we help people thrive, it too will have a ripple effect positively in every single aspect of a person's life. And so I think about that as a legislator, in terms of how do we build laws that ensure that we see the humanity in people, and we do things that help them, again, move through the economic ladder, the social ladder, to really show up for their own community and for themselves. And so dignity is my fulcrum, because it touches every other part of a person's existence. And if you have dignity in work and expression and support, I then know that we have a better chance of providing, that person has a better chance of providing for their families, and quite possibly for the broader community.
Ah, well put. And when your constituent think about you, what would you like them to remember about you?
Mm.
What do you want them to think of?
I would say that I would hope that they felt like I loved them. Love is the most powerful, um, word you can give to somebody, do for somebody, right? It's action oriented. And my hope is, when people look back at everything that I've ever been able to do in the legislature, and everything I'm going to do in the legislature, uh, it was based on this idea that I love them, and I want them to, um, feel that in how I show up for them, how I speak to them, what laws I pass, or what laws I push on their behalf. Because I think that's what's going to change our world, is more love for each other, love for our neighborhoods. Um, and so I use it as that's my hope. That's what I hope. I hope, like, man, he really did love me, man. Like, he really did share and show up for me in a way that I would have hoped anybody would have showed up for me. And so, um, it takes a lot to do. That's why I'm always getting love from my village as well, to replenish me. Um, but that's what I want. I hope people, my constituency, that I love them, and I'm going to fight like heck to make sure that they get what they need.
You advocate for dignity and you show love. You want them to know that you love them.
Yeah.
So, what does it mean for you to come on this show and to talk to the community?
Listen, I do this. I love being in spaces where I can be my authentic self. Um, there's mysticism that comes with politicians, and I try to show up differently by sharing my story, being vulnerable, you know, uh, really making sure folks understand that behind the words, the actions, is a human being, someone with a lived experience that inspires them. And so to be on the show means that I have an opportunity to share my story and uh, and help them understand the humanity behind what I do and how I move in this environment, right, in our communities, and also why I fight so hard. I mean, you know, I'm I'm fighting. We we do a lot of work, and I try to show up to as many community events and spaces as I can, um, to show that I love those folks. I love my constituents, and so being on the show allows me to, again, have an opportunity to share my story and my humanity, and hopefully folks get a little better understanding of kind of my ethos as a legislative leader, but also as a public servant.
Thank you for coming on to Legal Angle. It's been wonderful
Thank you.
listening to your story, talking to you, answering all these questions.
Of
Thank you.
course. Thank you, Emmanuel. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you as well. And for those of you watching us at home or listening to this as a podcast on your phone or your computer, we thank you for your time. We appreciate you. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our Facebook page. And until next time, stay blessed. Bye for now.
Peace.
Peace and love.